So this is a presentation for topic 2 from Unit 4. The title of this topic is Inflation and Deflation. So let's just start off with the basics first of all, a definition of these two different words on the board. Inflation, this measures a sustained rise in price levels. So in other words, it measures how much price levels change throughout time. If price levels are increasing throughout time, we've got inflation. If price levels are falling throughout time, then we have deflation. How do we go about measuring inflation? The most common way of measuring inflation is through CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. Here what we do, in effect, someone from the government goes shopping every month. They buy a basket of goods. This basket of goods is measured by the Family Expenditure Survey, and what this does is to work out the products that people buy on a monthly basis. So for example, it will include things like the food that people buy, household expenditure such as different bills that people have to pay for, and what we find is that the CPI consists 25% of food and 15% of housing costs. The other 60% will be made up of things like entertainment, driving costs, things like that. Okay. Now, what I want to say here is that what we also do is that we have a weighting to inflation. We have a weighted price index, and what this does, it attaches more importance to things that people buy more of and less importance to things that other people buy. So let's take an example. Let's imagine we have product A and we have product B. Both products cost, at the moment, £100. If we have 20% inflation, product A will be worth £120 at the end of the year. Product B, 50% inflation, goes up £150. Now, let's imagine that product B, most people don't buy in society. Product A, people buy a lot of. So because of that, product B will be given a very low weighting. It doesn't form that much of people's income because people don't buy much of it. Now, let's imagine throughout the year that people buy 10 products. They buy 9 of A and they buy 1 of B. In this case, what we might do is decide to attach a 90% weighting to product A and only a 10% weighting to product B. So this huge increase in prices of product B will be watered down to work out the inflation rate because product A is a more significant one. How do we go about creating inflation? We can draw this in two different diagrams. So we'll draw a basic macro equilibrium diagram. We've got price level and we've got real GDP. So let's draw the equilibrium point first of all. So we have AD and we have a short run aggregate supply curve. We'll draw both. Label our equilibrium points. Label them P1, Y1 in both cases. Now let's think about what we call first of all demand pull inflation. This is created by an increase in aggregate demand. So what we can see is that as demand increases, output will jump up to Y2, but because of that, price levels will start to increase. So demand pull inflation is more likely when the economy is heading towards a boom. So the amount of impact demand pull inflation has will depend on whether the economy is in a boom or in a bust. So in other words, the stage on the economic cycle. If we're in a recession, higher demand is likely to not create much inflation at all. This is because it's linked to the amount of available spare capacity. We know from our bathtub example that when the bath is empty, an increase in aggregate demand will not lead to much more inflation simply because there's still plenty of spare capacity in the economy. Businesses can meet the extra costs. When we're in a boom though, bathtub's full, we haven't got a lot much more room for growth. High demand creates massive scarcity, which forces prices even higher. Let's think about what we call cost push inflation. So this time, the cost of production increase. This will shift SRAS to the left, so to SRAS1. We see that the impact this has is that it will lower output and increase price levels. So let's think about some causes of this then. So we're looking at the costs of producing goods and services. So maybe labour costs have increased, maybe the tax on businesses have increased, or the interest rates on their borrowing, maybe health and safety requirements have increased. So all these different cost increases can lead to cost push inflation. The UK at the moment currently has inflation way above our target of 2%. It's currently running at well over 3%. That is mainly down to cost push inflation. It's mainly linked to oil prices increasing. Oil is an important resource used in the production of all sorts of different goods and services. Businesses need oil to transport goods around the country. Higher oil prices therefore will push up the costs in the country, therefore pushing up prices. Let's think now about the consequences of inflation. So what are the consequences of high inflation? Well, I consider the main ones. First one is linked to UK international competitiveness. If our prices are growing more than our rivals across the world, it means that British products start to become more expensive. The impact of this will mean that our exports are likely to fall. People will not want to buy our goods in as big quantities. It also might mean that more British people might find some products become cheaper to buy from abroad. So as competitiveness falls, what we find is there's an increasing likelihood that our trade deficit will go up, it will increase. High trade deficit is an overall leakage from the economy, so this will have a negative impact on employment levels, investment levels in the future, and future economic growth levels. Linked to this one, there'll be a fall in another injection into the economy. Investment falls. As Britain becomes a more expensive place to do business, more businesses think, you know what, we'll up sticks, we'll move somewhere cheaper. Again, this is likely to create structural unemployment in the economy, create negative multiplier effects as more and more of our businesses start to operate abroad. Let's think about another one. Menu costs. When prices are constantly changing, this becomes very expensive for businesses. Constantly having to reprint different menus, so it hits retailers very difficultly. That is an extra cost the business has to incur. Another one, fiscal drag. Big problem for taxpayers, higher inflation rates. As wages start to increase, people get sucked into higher tax brackets. They might not be any better off than what they were. What they find is that they pay higher tax. So let's take an example. Let's imagine we have somebody earning £20,000 a year. Currently, let's say their tax rate is 10%. At the moment, they're paying £2,000 tax. Let's imagine though that in 10 years' time, or in 5 years or a year's time, doesn't matter what, that same person's income shoots up to £40,000. But this is because of inflation. That £40,000 is not worth any more than £20,000 due to the rising cost of living. But because this person now earns more, they fall into a 20% tax bracket. This person will now pay £8,000 tax. They're now worse off than they were before, so we've got a fiscal drag problem. Overall, what I would say is though, is that inflation can be unanticipated and it can be anticipated. If businesses know it's coming, they can prepare for it. That means they can cut other costs in their business, or they can look to adapt what they do to take into account those inflation forecasts. If it's unanticipated, it hits the business hard. They cannot see it coming. This will mean that business profits might suddenly fall dramatically. Can't prepare for it. So clearly, unanticipated inflation is far worse than anticipated inflation. What I want to say though is that the UK does target 2% inflation. If inflation was such a bad thing, we'd aim for 0%, or we'd aim for prices to go down. But the problem is, we don't want that. We need some inflation in the economy because it appears that when the economy is growing, we have some inflation, that things are picking up. People like their wages to grow every year. In real terms, they might not be any better off because price levels are increasing at the same rate as their wages, but then people feel better off. So we do target some inflation. Another reason for some inflation is because the opposite is deflation. Price levels fall. This sounds a great thing, things become cheaper. But the big problem with deflation is it can lead the economy into recession. Aggregate demand will fall. Let's take an example why. If somebody was looking at buying a new house for £100,000, if we have deflation in the economy, that person knows that will be a very bad investment. That house price will fall in the following years. That will make it difficult to get a mortgage because the bank borrowing money based on that deal because of a higher risk. So people stop buying things, they continue waiting for prices to keep falling. And because people buy less, prices will start to fall even quicker. So deflation is seen as a bad thing. Now, when all prices fall in the economy, we call this malevolent. Malevolent deflation. This is seen as a bad thing, it leads to low demand in the economy. People wait for prices to fall. When we have benign deflation, though, this is seen as a good thing. This is when prices fall due to innovations, new ways of doing things. So, for example, we know that aeroplane flights have fallen in recent years. That's due to more innovation in that industry. We know that the cost of CDs has fallen, DVDs, technological products like computers. These products are falling because of new breakthroughs in technology. In other words, supply side policies are forcing these things to become cheaper. To end this topic, I want to bring in the Fisher equation. The Fisher equation shows that M times V is equal to P times T. Let's first of all write down what these different letters stand for. M is the money supply. V is the velocity, in other words, how quickly money travels around the economy. P, price levels. And T, number of transactions. In other words, the number of times a certain banknote or a certain coin will get used as its route around the economic cycle. Now, what we often find is that in most economies, V and T remain fairly constant. This will mean the higher the money supply, so the higher M is, the higher price levels will be in the economy. So if V and T remain constant, let's imagine V and T are fixed at 10. If money supply is 1, it means that price levels are 1. Let's imagine this time we increase money supply to 10. Higher money supply means that price levels have to grow by even more. So what the Fisher equation states is that if we want to control inflation, it's all about trying to control the money supply. So the lower the money supply is, the lower inflation will be in the economy. The higher the money supply, the more inflation we will have in the economy.